One day they support you, the next day they question you, and before you realize it, they oppose you. Without a fight, without a reason, without a word. This is not coincidence. This is not misunderstanding. This is a silent psychological war, and you were never meant to see it coming. People rarely turn against you because you did something wrong. They turn against you because something inside them was exposed. Your growth disturbs unconscious contracts that were never spoken, never signed, yet deeply enforced. These contracts form quietly in relationships long before anyone is aware of them. They are built from patterns, expectations, and emotional dependencies rather than words. Someone gets used to who you are when you are uncertain, accommodating, or unfinished. They learn how to position themselves in relation to you. They learn what role you play in their internal world. Over time, that role becomes fixed, and any deviation from it feels like a violation rather than progress. Most relationships are not based on mutual growth. They are based on emotional equilibrium. You behave in ways that keep the system stable. You doubt yourself just enough. You ask for approval just enough. You remain predictable. In return, others feel secure. They know how to treat you, how to think about you, and where they stand in comparison to you. This balance is rarely conscious, but it is powerful. It keeps people calm. It keeps hierarchies intact. It keeps identities unchallenged. The moment you begin to grow, this balance shifts. Growth changes how you speak, how you tolerate disrespect, how you respond to manipulation, how much access others have to your inner world. You stop over-explaining, you stop shrinking, you stop seeking permission. To you, this feels like alignment. To others, it feels like betrayal, not because you harmed them, but because you broke an agreement they believed was permanent. Unconscious contracts rely on consistency. When you change, the other person is forced to confront something uncomfortable. The relationship was never as equal or as free as they believed. Your growth reveals the hidden terms. It exposes who benefited from your hesitation, your self-doubt, your silence. And when those benefits disappear, the discomfort turns into resentment. This is why people often say, "You've changed," with an edge rather than curiosity. What they mean is not that you are different, but that you are no longer serving the function they unconsciously assigned you. You no longer confirm their self-image. You no longer absorb their projections. You no longer make them feel secure in the same way. Your growth destabilizes the narrative they built around you. For some, this triggers fear. If you can grow, it suggests they could have grown too. If you can step out of a limiting role, it exposes the fact that their role may also be self-imposed. Instead of facing that realization, the psyche looks for an external cause. It reframes your growth as arrogance, disloyalty, or ego. This allows them to preserve their internal structure without having to question it. What feels sudden to you was often building quietly. Every time you asserted a boundary, every time you chose clarity over approval, every time you didn't respond the way you used to, tension accumulated, the contract weakened. And when it finally broke, the reaction seemed disproportionate because the conflict was never about a single moment. It was about the loss of control, familiarity, and emotional leverage. This is why explanations rarely help. You cannot reason someone out of an unconscious agreement they were never aware of making. From their perspective, you changed the rules without consent. From your perspective, you simply became more yourself. Both realities can coexist, but only one allows growth to continue. Understanding this reframes betrayal. Not everyone who turns against you is malicious. Many are disoriented. They are reacting to the collapse of an inner structure that depended on you staying the same. Your growth forces a reckoning they did not ask for and may not be ready to face. When unconscious contracts are disturbed, relationships either evolve or dissolve. Those capable of self-reflection adjust. Those invested in the old equilibrium resist, and resistance often disguises itself as judgment, withdrawal, or quiet hostility rather than open conflict. This is why growth can feel lonely even when it is healthy, why progress can be met with coldness instead of celebration, and why becoming more whole sometimes costs you the comfort of being familiar to others, projection to adoration. Hostility is expanded in 600 words and never add any ending sentence. Projection turns admiration when the quality, when you awaken unresolved, perhaps you awaken unresolved tension inside them. At first, admiration feels safe. It allows another person to appreciate your confidence, creativity, clarity, or emotional depth without having to embody those traits themselves. They can admire from a distance and still remain unchanged. But admiration is fragile when it is built on comparison rather than connection. When time passes and your traits remain consistent or even deepen, admiration begins to shift. What was once inspiring becomes confronting. The same strength that attracted them now highlights what they avoid within themselves. The same independence that once impressed them now exposes the dependence. The psyche does not like prolonged exposure to its own absence. Instead of turning inward and asking what is missing, it turns outward and looks for a target. Projection is not a conscious act. It is a psychological defense that protects identity. When someone cannot integrate a trait they see in you, they assign emotional weight to it. They exaggerate it. They distort it. Your confidence becomes arrogance. Your boundaries become coldness. Your self-respect becomes selfishness. This transformation does not happen because you changed, but because their relationship to that trait changed. Admiration requires humility. It requires acknowledging that another person possesses something you do not yet have. For many, this is tolerable only for a short time. As the gap between who they are and who they could be becomes more obvious, discomfort rises. That discomfort needs somewhere to go. Projection offers relief by relocating internal conflict onto you. This is why hostility often feels sudden. One day you are valued, the next you are questioned. The shift feels illogical because it is not driven by reason. It is driven by the need to maintain a stable self-image. By turning admiration into criticism, the psyche restores balance. If you are no longer admirable, then nothing is missing in them. Projection also feeds on proximity. The closer you are, the more intense the reaction. A distant role model can be admired indefinitely. A friend, partner, or colleague who embodies unintegrated traits becomes a constant mirror. Every interaction reinforces the contrast. Over time, the mirror feels unbearable. Instead of stepping away or growing, some choose to shatter the reflection by attacking the source. Hostility created through projection often hides behind moral language. You are accused of changing, becoming difficult, thinking you are better than others. These accusations are not observations, they are emotional translations. They express fear of inadequacy, loss of relevance, or exposure. The attack is not on your behavior, but on what your existence represents. What makes projection particularly painful is that It often comes from those who once supported you. Their early admiration created a sense of safety. When that admiration turns into opposition, it feels like betrayal, but psychologically, it is the same mechanism continuing under pressure. The admiration was never fully about you. It was about what you symbolized for them at that time. As you continue to embody what they cannot integrate, their hostility may escalate or become passive. Sarcasm replaces praise. Distance replaces closeness. Your name is mentioned differently when you are not present. None of this requires you to do anything wrong. Your mere presence is enough to activate unresolved material in their inner world. Understanding projection does not mean excusing harmful behavior. It means refusing to personalize reactions that were never truly about you. When admiration turns into hostility, it is often a sign that you have crossed a psychological threshold. You are no longer just inspiring, you are confronting. You are no longer safe to admire, you are difficult to ignore. This awareness allows you to stop seeking validation from those who cannot face themselves. It allows you to see criticism as information about another person's inner conflict rather than a verdict on your worth. Projection loses power when you recognize its source. What was once confusing becomes predictable. What was once hurtful becomes intelligible. And in that clarity, you no longer shrink to make others comfortable, nor do you harden to defend yourself, because you understand that hostility born from projection is of unfinished inner work that was never yours to complete. Individuation creates invisible enemies. Expand it in 600 words and never add any endings. Enter individuation creates invisible enemies, because becoming a distinct psychological self-consistent, that the unspoken system is the analytical self-consistent. Compliance and predictability. When you begin to separate who you truly are from who you were conditioned to be, you stop moving in emotional formation with the people around you. This separation is subtle at first. There is no announcement, no rebellion, no obvious conflict. Yet something shifts in how you carry yourself, how you choose, and how you respond. That shift is often enough to unsettle those who were invested in the old arrangement. Most social bonds form around shared identities and mutual reinforcement. People unconsciously agree on what is acceptable to feel, say, and pursue. These agreements create safety, but they also create limits. Individuation challenges those limits without directly confronting them. You begin to act from inner authority rather than external approval. You listen inwardly before responding outwardly. This change may look quiet, but psychologically it is radical. Invisible enemies emerge when others sense that you are no longer governed by the same rules. You are harder to predict. You are less reactive. You do not need the same validation. This creates anxiety in those who rely on emotional leverage or shared insecurity to maintain closeness. They may not understand what is happening, but they feel a loss of influence. And where influence disappears, suspicion often takes its place. Unlike open opposition, invisible resistance operates in subtle ways. There is a change in tone, a hesitation where warmth once existed, a delay in support that used to be automatic. You may notice that your successes are acknowledged less enthusiastically, or that your ideas are quietly dismissed. No one declares hostility. No one states their discomfort directly. The tension remains unspoken, making it difficult to address. Individuation exposes difference, and difference threatens cohesion. When you step outside a shared identity, You implicitly question it. Your independence suggests that other ways of being are possible. For those who have built their sense of self entirely within the group, this can feel destabilizing. Instead of exploring that discomfort, they externalize it. You become the source of unease. This is why invisible enemies often do not see themselves as adversaries. In their own minds, they are responding to something wrong, something off, something unsettling about you. They may frame their resistance as concern, criticism, or distance. But beneath these rationalizations lies a deeper reaction to your psychological autonomy. You are no longer participating in the same emotional economy. Individuation also dissolves unconscious alliances. When you stop playing a familiar role, others are forced to renegotiate theirs. Some are unwilling or unable to do so. Rather than adapt, they protect the old structure by resisting the one who disrupted it. This resistance does not always look aggressive. It can appear as indifference, exclusion, or quiet undermining. The pain of invisible enemies comes from their ambiguity. There is no clear conflict to resolve, no accusation to respond to. You sense opposition without evidence. This can lead to self-doubt if you are not grounded in your inner process. You may question whether you are imagining it, whether you are being overly sensitive. In reality, you are perceiving a shift in relational dynamics that cannot be easily articulated. Individuation often brings loneliness before it brings freedom. As you move toward wholeness, you may temporarily lose the comfort of belonging, not because you have become unworthy, but because you no longer fit into spaces that require fragmentation to function. Invisible enemies are not a sign of failure. They are a sign that you have crossed a psychological boundary. Those who can tolerate your individuation will either grow with you or release you without resentment. Those who cannot will resist quietly, maintaining a surface level connection while withdrawing emotional support. Recognizing this allows you to stop searching for explanations in your behavior and start understanding the deeper forces at play. When you continue the process of individuation, despite this resistance, the landscape eventually changes. Some connections fall away, new ones form that are aligned with who you are becoming. The invisible enemies lose relevance as your inner authority strengthens. What remains is a quieter, more stable sense of self that no longer requires unanimous approval to exist because it is rooted in internal coherence rather than external consensus. Silence is the battlefield expanded in 600 words, and never add any ending sentences. Silence is the battlefield, because the most decisive psychological conflicts rarely announce themselves through group confrontation. They unfold in pauses, omissions, and absences. There is no raised voice, no clear accusation, no visible rupture. Instead, something simply stops flowing. Words become measured. Responses arrive later than they used to. Presence turns into distance. What makes this battlefield so disorienting is that nothing overtly happens, yet everything changes. Silence functions as a weapon precisely because it cannot be challenged directly. You cannot argue with what is not said. You cannot defend yourself against what is withheld. In silent conflict, there is no clear charge, only a growing sense of tension. This forces the other person to search for meaning, often turning inward and questioning themselves. The silence creates ambiguity, and ambiguity creates self-doubt. In psychological terms, silence allows unresolved emotions to operate without accountability. Instead of expressing discomfort, resentment, or fear, the individual withdraws engagement. This withdrawal protects them from vulnerability while still exerting influence. By saying nothing, they avoid exposure, yet their absence communicates disapproval. The message is felt, not spoken. Silence also preserves power. Open conflict risks clarity. It allows both sides to understand what is happening and respond accordingly. Silence, however, keeps the upper hand. The one who withdraws controls the narrative by refusing to define it. This leaves the other person guessing, often overcompensating in an attempt to restore equilibrium. Apologies are offered without knowing what they are for. Explanations are given without being asked for. The battlefield favors the one who withholds. This is why silence is often chosen when the conflict cannot be justified rationally. If the true reason for the shift was spoken aloud, it would reveal insecurity, jealousy, or fear. Silence avoids this exposure. It allows the individual to maintain a self-image of reasonableness while still acting out their discomfort. The conflict remains hidden even from themselves. Over time, silence erodes trust more effectively than confrontation. When communication stops, the relationship loses its shared reality. You no longer know where you stand. You sense judgment without hearing it. You feel excluded without being told why. This uncertainty destabilizes the psyche, especially for those conditioned to seek harmony and understanding. The silence exploits that conditioning. Silence also invites projection. In the absence of information, the mind fills the gap. You replay interactions, analyze tone, search for mistakes. The conflict expands internally, even if externally nothing appears wrong. The battlefield moves inside you. What began as someone else's unspoken discomfort becomes your internal struggle to restore meaning. This is why silence can feel more aggressive than anger. Anger at least confirms engagement. Silence communicates indifference or rejection, which strikes deeper. It threatens belonging. It suggests that the relationship itself may no longer be secure. The lack of response becomes a form of psychological exclusion. In silent wars, the goal is rarely resolution. It is regulation. Silence is used to manage anxiety, reassert control, or punish deviation without risking confrontation. It is a way of saying something is wrong without having to say what. This keeps the conflict unresolved, allowing it to continue indefinitely. The danger of this battlefield is that it tempts you to fight in the same way. You may withdraw in return, mirror the distance, or attempt to decode the silence through indirect means. This only deepens the stalemate. Two inner worlds pull away from each other without ever meeting. Recognizing silence as a battlefield changes how you respond to it. Instead of chasing clarity from someone who withholds it, you can observe the pattern. Instead of assuming fault, you can acknowledge that something unspoken is being enacted. This awareness does not force speech from the other person, but it frees you from internalizing the conflict. Silence loses its power when you stop trying to resolve what was never openly presented. When you refuse to fill the gaps with self-blame, the battlefield becomes visible. You see that the conflict exists not in what you did, but in what the other person cannot say. And in that recognition, you reclaim your psychological ground, no longer fighting an invisible war alone. Betrayal often begins as inner conflict long before it appears as external behavior. What feels like someone turning against you is usually the final stage of a struggle that has been unfolding privately within them. Long before words change or distance appears, something inside them becomes unstable. A feeling they cannot name, A comparison they cannot escape, a tension they cannot resolve starts to grow beneath the surface. Inner conflict arises when reality clashes with identity. Someone may see you evolving, asserting boundaries, gaining clarity, or embodying qualities they once ignored or postponed in themselves. This creates psychological friction. On one side is who they believe themselves to be. On the other is the uncomfortable evidence that something remains undeveloped. The psyche seeks relief from this tension, not truth. And when self-examination feels too threatening, the conflict is displaced outward. This displacement marks the beginning of betrayal. Not betrayal as a conscious decision, but as a coping mechanism. Instead of facing their own fear, envy, or inadequacy, they unconsciously reframe the situation. You become the source of discomfort. Your growth becomes the problem. Your presence becomes irritating. By assigning blame externally, they restore internal balance without having to change. At this stage, their behavior may still appear normal. They may smile, engage, and maintain appearances, but internally, a narrative is forming. Small details are reinterpreted to support it. Neutral actions are given negative meaning. Past interactions are rewritten to justify emerging resentment. This inner story allows them to slowly detach emotionally while preserving a sense of righteousness. As the inner conflict intensifies, distance becomes necessary. Emotional withdrawal provides temporary relief. It reduces exposure to the trigger, which is you. This withdrawal is rarely explained honestly because the true reason feels unacceptable even to themselves. Instead, excuses appear: business, fatigue, a vague sense that things feel different. None of these address the real issue, but they allow separation to grow without confrontation. Betrayal becomes visible when inner justification solidifies. Once the person fully accepts the externalized narrative, they feel entitled to act on it. This may take the form of withdrawal of support, subtle sabotage, gossip, or sudden coldness. From their perspective, these actions feel defensive rather than aggressive. They believe they are responding to something wrong, not creating it. What makes this process painful is that it lacks transparency. You experience the outcome without witnessing the inner struggle that led to it. The shift feels abrupt because you were not present for the internal negotiations that preceded it. To you, loyalty disappeared overnight. To them, it has been eroding quietly for some time. Inner conflict also distorts empathy. As resentment grows internally, the ability to see you clearly diminishes. Your intentions are questioned. Your words are filtered through suspicion. Even kindness can be reinterpreted as manipulation. This distortion allows betrayal to occur without guilt. If you are no longer seen accurately, harming the connection feels justified. It is important to understand that not all inner conflicts lead to betrayal. Some people turn inward, reflect, and grow. Others cannot tolerate the discomfort of self-examination. For them, externalizing the conflict feels safer than confronting it. Betrayal is not caused by your actions alone, but by how those actions interact with unresolved material in someone else's psyche. Recognizing betrayal as the outcome of inner conflict changes how you process it. Instead of endlessly reviewing your behavior, you begin to see the limits of your influence. You did not create the internal struggle. You merely became the surface on which it was projected. This understanding does not erase the hurt, but it restores perspective. When someone turns against you without explanation, it is often because they chose relief over honesty, protection over growth. Their silence, distance, or hostility is the visible expression of an invisible war. They were fighting within themselves, a war they resolved not by integrating what troubled them, but by pushing it outward and letting the relationship absorb the damage. Betrayal often begins as inner conflict expanded in 600 words and never add any ending sentence. Betrayal often begins as inner conflict long before it takes shape as behavior. What later feels like disloyalty, abandonment, or sudden opposition usually starts as a quiet psychological fracture that the other person does not know how to face. Nothing external has happened yet. No argument, no clear disagreement, no visible rupture. The conflict lives entirely inside them, growing slowly, fed by feelings they cannot easily name or accept. Inner conflict arises when someone's internal self-image is challenged by reality. They may see you changing, stabilizing, gaining confidence, or becoming more self-directed. This contrast activates tension. On one side is who they believe they are. On the other is the uncomfortable awareness of something unfinished, avoided, or feared within themselves. Rather than confronting that gap, the psyche looks for relief. And relief is often found not through reflection, but through displacement. Displacement turns internal discomfort into external blame. Instead of asking why your growth unsettles them, the mind asks what is wrong with you. Subtle emotional reactions begin to shift. Irritation replaces warmth. Suspicion replaces trust. What once felt neutral now feels provocative. These reactions are not yet betrayal, but they are the groundwork for it. The person is beginning to separate emotionally in order to protect themselves from inner instability. During this phase, they may still act supportive on the surface. They may continue the relationship as before, but internally they are renegotiating it. They reinterpret past moments, selectively remembering events that support their emerging narrative. Small disappointments are magnified. Ambiguities are resolved against you. This inner story gives structure to their discomfort and allows them to feel justified without having to look inward. As the inner conflict intensifies, closeness becomes threatening. Your presence activates what they are trying to avoid. Emotional distance provides relief. This is why betrayal often feels sudden to the one experiencing it. The withdrawal appears abrupt, but it is the result of a process that has been unfolding quietly. The decision to detach has already been rehearsed internally many times. When inner conflict is not resolved through self-awareness, it seeks expression through action. This is where betrayal becomes visible. Support is withheld. Loyalty weakens. Words lose their sincerity. In some cases, trust is actively broken through gossip, alliance shifting, or subtle undermining. From the outside, these actions appear intentional and cruel. From the inside, they feel necessary and even justified. What allows betrayal to occur without remorse is distortion. Once the inner narrative solidifies, empathy decreases. You are no longer seen clearly. Motives are questioned. Your actions are filtered through suspicion. This distortion protects the betrayer from guilt. If you are framed as the problem, then acting against you feels reasonable rather than harmful. Betrayal rooted in inner conflict is rarely about what you did in a single moment. It is about what you came to represent over time. You may symbolize independence they lack, boundaries they fear, growth they postponed, or clarity they resist. The psyche reacts not to facts, but to meaning. And meaning, when unexamined, can become dangerous. Understanding this does not excuse betrayal, but it explains its origin. It reveals why confrontation often fails to produce clarity. The person is not responding to the present moment, but to an internal struggle that has already reached its conclusion. By the time betrayal surfaces, the emotional decision has been made long ago. This perspective also changes how you carry the aftermath. Instead of endlessly searching for the mistake that caused the rupture, you recognize the limits of your responsibility. You were not participating in their inner conflict. You were simply living in alignment with yourself. The betrayal did not begin when they acted against you. It began when they chose relief over reflection, avoidance over awareness, and projection over integration, allowing an unresolved inner tension to quietly reshape the relationship from the inside out